All right, we are back. We have our favorite fucking guest, Mr. Rolf Ohman. Is that right, Rolf?
That's it right. It took you 5 episodes to get it right.
so, so we have, I have questions for you, and the one care in the world that I have right now is acceleration. Okay, this is
Yep.
my question: what the fuck do we do? So I have guys that I mean, what are we looking for the first step? Now, your guys, when you coach the first step, you're coming out of blocks, so your first step is going to be a little bit different from mine. But I mean, what are we looking for coaching, right? So I have guys whose first step is like 1.6 meters per second, 1.8 meters per second. Some guys 2.0 meters per second. Some guys 2.2. And I don't know. I want to know how you go about influencing it. Do you influence it through meters per second? Is that what you're tracking? Are you tracking what is it? Watts per kilowatt per kilogram? Like what are we looking at here?
Yeah, we've Kenneth at the Melbourne Sports Academy and we've started looking at things like, I mean, we've been looking at TPV, of course, which for a long time, which is an acceleration index. Then we've looked at watts per kilo body weight over time. And now we're looking at watts and kilos per second is something that we're getting very interested in, because in a lot of these events where you need to get things moving from a stationary position, you've got inertial weight that you've got to overcome, and that's the biggest inertial weight is when you're at standstill. So therefore, it makes sense to look at how many kilos per second can I move. We've been tracking a little bit of that for a few years in the eccentric phase, and we've seen that some of these guys that are these big throwers that are throwing like 68, 69 meters in the discus and stuff like that, they're generating massive amounts. We're talking like, I think we had one guy who was over sort of like 10,000 Newton meters, which is 1,000 kilos per second. Now, he's not lifting more than like 160 kilos, but the fact that he's moving things so fast, it actually translates to 1,000 kilos per second.
What exercise is this using? One of the step up?
No, this is for these guys. It'd be squats. It'd be anywhere between quarter squats, half squats, and just very, very fast with a sizable amount of weight. But I think I think one of the big things with acceleration is, I mean, we all know about shin angles. I think one of the things that we lose sometimes, which I've noticed over the last couple of months with the guy that I've got, who's my sprinter who's now off to Paris, is that when things don't click, what I've seen that's breaking down is his calf ankle.
So yeah, that's when we talk about shin angle and acceleration, essentially what we're talking about from a power standpoint is how everything coincides with, or how everything meshes with the ankle complex, with the foot ankle complex, right? That's the transfer of power. But you could train the hip and the knee at whatever fucking angle you want. It's the incorporating the calf ankle, foot ankle is where the angular velocity or whatever it is comes into play, right?
Yeah, the stiffness has got to be relative to, you can get good stiffness, but then as speed picks up, which it does with these guys very, very quickly, if your stiffness doesn't have capacity, as you increase velocity, you'll see that you'll get variances in what happens. And this is where for example, the 1080 sprint is so good. And Randy and I have been fiddling around with looking at the curves. So if you've got a curve, the normal sort of sinus curve that you get from left, right, and then you get like a little wiggle in the way up, and then you've got a wiggle on the way down. Well, that means that you're doing two things differently. For example, if the wiggle is on the way down on the other side, that means that you're trying to push too long. So you're in the ground too long, which is typical if you're breaking down with ankle stiffness. You don't have enough ankle stiffness. So you're trying to create it by letting the knee move forward and create stiffness and then go from there. If that little disturbance comes on the way up, that's typical of somebody hitting the ground and then getting the hell out of there way too early. So they're just trying to rip their foot off the ground. So you've got to sort of coincide this by, and by peaking at the right time as well.
So this is where I think I'll push back a little bit on this, where I have a guy that had a sesamoidectomy, and I'm tracking his steps, and I see the wiggle in the front, whereas by your rationale, it should be more on the back end, right?
Yeah. The thing is, if he's got the wiggle at the front end of it, you'll also see what they tend to do then is their foot will move up and they'll have a big posterior wheel and a little anterior wheel. Whereas in this case, we want it the opposite. We want the wheel at the front and a small wheel at the back, because we want to get the foot from toe off back front. We need it to go in a straight line. No deviation, no scenic tour.
Yeah. Now, all our team sport athletes, they have, or someone will call them like excessive backside mechanics, let's say. All our team sport athletes will have that, like almost every single one of them.
Yeah.
Do you think that is optimal for team sport, a result of good? Because I mean, what is the excessive backside mechanics going to cause? It's going to cause a lower angle, right? Like it'll a lower exit angle. In which case you're going to stay lower to the ground, which is going to make it easier for you to move laterally and change direction than being upright. No.
And also, in these positions in American football where you're going to block somebody very, very early on, you need to keep your feet low to the ground, because if you've got excess backside mechanics, well, then that is a perfect guy. And to be quite honest, I've watched a few games of football, and it seems that there are guys out there who, I don't know if they actually are doing this on purpose, but I think they're realizing that the position that certain people get into when this big action is happening, they know exactly when to hit them because they're out of balance. That there's no way they can. So it doesn't matter if I weigh 150 kilos. If I've got massive big backside mechanics going on, I'm going to be like a ballerina. If I hit you, you're going to go down. It doesn't matter if I weigh 85 kilos and you weigh 160, you're going down, because you just can't do anything if everything's up here. You need to keep everything down in a low center of gravity, and it's difficult because if you listen to sprinters. For example, if I talk to Rainer and we've had the discussion, and I talk about switching, and he doesn't like that word, which is fine. But you've got to sort of. I always look at it. If I can't get through to an athlete saying A, well, I'm going to have to try B, C, and D to get it mentally. But then you've got the problem where some athletes you can tell them virtually, you can recite a PhD dissertation and they'll understand it. Where there's other people, whether I'm one of those, I see things through pictures. Like even though I don't have any problems with theory. It's some people you see it through imagery, some people see it through the fact that you only need to say one or two things to them and they've got it. So I think when somebody says, well, no, we don't do switching, we don't do that, okay, but how do you tell people what to do? And I've heard coaches say, well, we just do this and they'll figure it out. Yeah, okay.
When you say switching, are you talking about the first steps like pistons from an engine, right? That's what,
it's that position, and then all you do is just switch from there.
So, it's interesting when I'm cueing my guys and I'm getting the direct feedback. Um, I mean, I'll give them cues that I've never given before in my life to get them to, like, I'll say, hey, knees up, knees up, knees up, knees up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because push back, knees up, push back, knees up, push back, knees up. And I'll just say this, and I'll notice like it's whatever they need to fucking hear
Mm.
to get them going. Whereas like I mean, bro, I've never coached someone to say knees up. It's always, a push back or a spring off the ground, whatever it is. But the knees up works, and or a switch, quick switch work, or strike the ground, or whatever it is, whatever that person needs to hear is what you say. But I will say this: going strictly by data and meters per second, the form, if you're training these guys to sprint faster, the form changes. There's a difference between training for speed and training for team sports. And there's a reason why all these guys run with the excessive backside mechanics. It's an adaptation to their sport. It's whatever their sport required. Or do you think it's just they've never been coached the right way?
I personally, I think it's that they've never been coached. For example, if you look at soccer, for example, I've been saying for 25 years, soccer players from this age, when they're sort of like 6, 7 years, they should be taught how to run 2 different ways. One with the ball and one without the ball. With the ball, you need to have a low center of gravity, your feet, it's virtually like you're pushing in the first 20 meters. Because if you've got high knees, all I have to do as an opponent is just wait for you to come by and just stick my foot out and take the ball. You've got the control over the ball. So you need to be down, and your feet are much closer to the ground when you've got the ball. But then when you are without the ball, you've got to be able to get up in that position and know how to run properly. And that they don't. And this is why they all have hamstring problems, because that's, if you look at it, I did a couple of studies where I looked at where they're getting injuries, and they're hitting injuries when they get over 85% of max velocity, and there's no contact involved. So in other words, now they're starting to get into what we would call max velocity positions. And the other thing is they've got no pelvic control. So their pelvis is going back and forth like a washing machine, which of course causes huge strains on the hamstring. They've got no adductors, which means if they're changing direction at the same time, then the adductors aren't there, which then means the hamstrings have got to take up the adductor work. And then all of a sudden it's game over. So I think this is the problem. And the other thing is that if you any adaptation, how much adaptation do we get to, let's say, sprint mechanics if we're only running it? And this is the case when you've got people that are going to run maximum fast, because we do know that soccer players, quite a few of them, will reach virtually 10 meters per second. Now that's not dawdling. I mean, that's pretty quick. But in training, do they actually do anything that runs 10 meters per second? Oh, hell no. I mean, I've watched one of the best national teams in the world train for 4 months, and honestly, I could have on one hand count the amount of sessions that they did where they were actually running and training anything that had to do with max velocity positions. So for me, it's I just wrote a thing today on social media about the Swedes are really upset that they didn't qualify for the European Cup. They're now saying that they're a third world country in football. And the thing is, and I said, well, I told the Italians this 12 years ago. I wrote a report and said to them, if you don't change things drastically, you will be at the back end of what's going to happen within football. They have now missed 2 World Cups in a row, and they got knocked out of the European Cup here last week resoundingly. I mean, their football team is nothing compared to the team that won the World Championships in 2006. The rest of the world have taken a big step forward. The Italians have taken a big step back, as has the Swedes. And the 2 things that they're doing wrong, they're behaving like robots. So they can't solve problems on the field because they've got all these set patterns But in soccer, there is no set patterns. In American football, that's how you play football. It's set patterns. In football, the ball bounces this way, that way, this way, whatever. It's a completely different type of a game.
So when we're working with our soccer players, I don't notice excessive backside mechanics with them. I notice more east to west movement, and I notice like annoying arms, right? Like they don't have arm mechanics, and it's side to side.
Yeah.
Whereas hockey players, same thing, but like that's the sport. With my football players, I notice, except for skill guys, I notice backside mechanics. And why? Like their job is to push, 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 push. They need to block. They need to push people in front of them. Like that's I I I don't think I think it's an adaptation to the sport, not necessarily. And sure, they haven't been coached to run at max velocity, but the position doesn't require it. So it's never been a necessity until you do, combine prep. Baseball, when are they ever in max velocity? You run 30 meters straight line or 30 yards straight line, and that's the fastest you'll ever go before you, and that's to first base. And then you have to decelerate. If you run 60 yards, first to second base or second to home, you're constantly in deceleration and at an angle. So with these team sports, it just hasn't been something that's, I mean, they haven't been coached to do it, but if you're constantly in acceleration and constantly having to be in drive phase, wouldn't this be optimal?
Yeah, no, I think exactly. But then again, then you've got to teach them, how to be in an optimal position for a drive phase, or if we want to call it that.
So do you think that having that fast switch and not as long of a ground contact time is optimal for a team sport athlete?
I think team sport athletes will have much higher ground contact times than, for example, a sprinter.
But now that's clearly it's because they're not trained to be sprinters. But do you think it's less optimal to have the longer ground contact time as the team sport athlete, because they typically need to generate and absorb more force, whether you're wearing pads or whether you're rounding the bases, making a cut, or whether you have a ball, that you need to control, or a puck that you need to control and then stop on a dime, like to be able to expose yourself to more or less force and be able to react. Whereas, have you ever seen these track athletes try to decelerate? I think they're going to roll an ankle every 5 seconds. It's embarrassing. It's unathletic. We have our track people, and they slow down on their tootsies, like ooh, like hot lava. That's not how you decelerate. You know what I mean? Like they're twinkle toes. So they have no tibialis anterior strength. They have no ankle strength. Whereas, I mean, my football players that are 300 pounds know how to decelerate way better than these Tinkerbells. So I don't know. I go back and forth with this, like, because I am coaching these guys running form now that I have instant feedback, right? And I can see step by step, meters per second, what's the optimal. And I question myself. I'm like, they're running faster, but is this going to benefit them in the game?
So what are you doing now? You're doing as long of a step as you can from the first step. So it's longer ground contact.
No. So what I'm currently coaching, but I'm just questioning what I'm doing. I'm currently coaching these motherfuckers to get as fast as they possibly can. That's what I'm coaching. Right? Like, sure. I am trying to get reduced ground contact time, higher meters per second each step. And I want each step to be progressive and symmetrical as best as we can. Now, I train team sport guys. There's asymmetries. You have guys that are on one side of the field versus the other side of the ball. You know what I mean? Like, you have guys that are righties versus lefties for swingers and throwers. So there's going to be asymmetries. And you have guys that roll ankles. You don't get that in track, rolled ankles. You know what I mean? So, like, it's a different thing that I'm looking to coach and encourage. But I wonder, like, do I really want to encourage this And like, this is what makes this guy a great tight end or a great running back, because he's able to strike the ground and extend through and push through the block. Or like, do I teach him, hey, there's a time and a place for each one? In which case, like, it needs to be unconscious competence anyway. So you can't fucking teach them at what point to do it. And it takes what, 500 hours to invoke a change of motor pattern for that case too. So like, what am I doing? What am I coaching?
I think the way I've looked at it, and this is what I did with hockey, and also with soccer, was that I looked at it from a positional point of view, that a striker, a midfielder, and a defender, they don't have the same, they're not doing the same thing on the field.
Yes.
So therefore, these guys are going to have to train differently. And this was, of course, when I told the Italians this in 2012, I mean, a few of the clubs in the Serie A, they completely freaked out. And they were yelling, oh, we don't have time. And I said, excuse me, you guys are full-time staff. This is the only thing you do. You don't have time? Bullshit. Bullshit. That's your bloody job. Get your finger out of your rear end. You know, you're not going to go down to the local bar and sit there and drink, Prosecco at night and I'm a fitness coach with Udinese or Juventus or whatever the club you are. This is your profession, and the profession is to get these guys prepared for what they're doing. So I looked at it from two ways, and that is my suggestion to the Italians, and I stand by this. You've got to have a general base for everybody, bar one, the goalkeeper, because they do something that the rest of them don't even do. So he's out of this. He's in a different way. The rest of them, get them a baseline, and then for each position there will be various, like you're a 100-meter runner. Okay, so this is your energy system. 200-meter runner, it's a different energy system. 400, different. Long jumper, different. Triple jumper, different. Same thing in football, different position. But all of these guys, if you look at track and field, they all have very, very similar basics at which is the foundation. And then we elevate that to specific skills for each and every event. And I think that's the way to do it in team sports.
So now, going back, how are you improving the acceleration outside of mechanics? What are you doing to improve acceleration? Are you doing speed squats? Are you doing plyometric jumps? Tell me. Tell me how, if you are me, if Rolf is Mike Guadango and he has currently NFL guys prior to camp and we're working on acceleration, what are we doing to improve this?
Well, for example, one thing that I do, and Randy does the same thing, and that is, if you look at, for example, the angles that a sprinter will use coming out of the blocks, and let's say the first 40 meters, if you grab him and rotate him around and put him in the blocks, and you see that the angles he's got, and then ride him back up again, and then look at, what are those angles in the squat? So in other words, we'll do a 30 centimeter step up, and then we'll do a 20 centimeter step up and a 10 centimeter step up, because these angles will show exactly as they're coming out of the blocks and going towards upright positions. These are the angles that he'll be working at.
So you do them in the same session?
In the same set.
In the same set.
So I'll do the first set at 30 centimeters, the second set. So for example, today we did 3 repetitions at 30 centimeters at 100 kilos, 3 at 20 centimeters at 120, and 3 at 10 centimeters at 140.
Right.
Are you following it with a plyometric, or that is your plyo?
That is the plyo, because if you look at the TPV times, they will progressively go down from about 270 to 180 to about 140.
What are you using to track the TPV times?
I use Muscle Lab.
Yeah. So it's interesting.
Mike, how comes you go from larger range of motion, less weight, to less range of motion, more weight, and why not the other way around?
Well, first of all, it's not, it's less weight, it's less external weight, but you got to remember also, he's got to accelerate only his body. So if he weighs 80 kilos, he's got to accelerate 80. When he steps up on a 30 centimeter box, his thigh is horizontal.
Yeah.
So he's got to lift 80 kilos plus the 100 kilos. He's actually lifting 180 kilos.
Right.
So
That
I'm
makes sense.
already double body weight.
Right. Right.
And if we look at sprints, once we get over about 1.7 body weight, and you can do that like this is when things start to happen. That's sort of like the base figures that we've learned, that you need to be able to push double body weight fast as hell. Otherwise, you ain't getting out there. It's simple as that. There are exceptions to the rules, but they're 1 in 10,000, and we don't get them very often.
Sure. I just would have thought you would have started with the smaller step up first, because the TPV is less, so a bit more rigorous to the nervous system.
Yeah.
But then I guess it makes more sense because it's more similar to the sprint, where there's bigger knee angles at the beginning to begin less.
Well, this is a different school of thought, because what Charlie was saying, and this is something that I observed as myself, and that is that the body, the central nervous system has a memory. Now, it remembers the last thing you did. Now, if the last thing you did was a slow 270 millisecond or TPV with a 30 centimeter step up, then you go home, that's the end of the session. That's what the central nervous system remembers and backlogs and says, right, this is level, this is ground zero. But if I finish with a 140 milliseconds, that's ground zero now. All of a sudden, it's considerably higher. So I'm prepping the nervous system to do something that is as fast as what we can do. And I want him to remember that, because I want to prime that for the next session. So the next session today was, we did the weights in the morning, and this afternoon we did accelerations with resistance. So we went from 15 kilos down to 5 kilos, and it goes down to 5 kilos at about 5.5 meters per second, which is virtually 4 steps. So it ramps down. And then that was 1 repetition. And then after about 8-9 minutes, we do an assisted run, where I'm giving him assistance over 20 meters, and then he runs another 20 meters. And we hit today we hit 11.5 meters per second at the end of the 40. And that's virtually 98% of what he's run. He's run 11.78 meters per second in a comp. So we're getting very close to what he can run. And we did that in training.
So you guys do a ton of contrast work.
Yeah.
And I started incorporating some contrast work as well, where I'll do, now my guys aren't the elite sprinters that your guys are. So we'll do about 30% body weight, 15% body weight, 2 sets each, 10 yards. So 10 yards at 30% body weight, 2 sets, minute rest using the Charlie rule. Then 20 yards at 15% body weight. And that'll be, again, 2 minutes using the Charlie rule. And then we'll do a 20-meter sprint, or a 20-yard sprint, meters, yards, whatever the fuck. And that'll be unresisted. Now, what's interesting is the higher the level of sprinter, the less unresisted sprints they need. The lower the level of sprinter, the more unresisted sprints they'll need in order to actually get faster. And as our sets have gone on, like they only need the 1 exposure as they've gotten better and more used to the skill of the contrast. Now, all my guys are getting faster doing that. Go on. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, this is interesting, because one thing I found with the guy that I coach is that one problem he has, and this is, again, if we look at when he has problems in a race model and he doesn't quite execute the way we want, this is the problem. And that is, for example, this is why I did the session like we did today, where he has to do a heavy acceleration and then he has to do an overspeed, because that is going from the acceleration into max velocity running. He doesn't like that combination.
Wait. So you'll do you'll do a contrast of an acceleration work followed by overspeed, top speed work in the same set.
Yeah. So we'll do 3 revolutions of that. So
What will the rest of something like that be?
10 minutes.
So you'll do and your acceleration, your weighted your weighted sprint will be what, 20 meters, 30 meters?
Yeah, 20. We did 20 meters today.
And how much resistance?
15 kilos with the 1080, which is pretty heavy, and then it ramps down to 5 kilos. And I set the speed where it hits that ramp at 5.5 meters per second.
So you could set it so when you hit 5.5 meters per second, the resistance releases or slowly releases.
And 5 kilos. So and what happens then is it'll ramp down from 15 down to 5 kilos, and it will be 5 kilos by the time you hit 5.5 meters per second, which is what we call VO 0 max.
Yeah. I've noticed what I don't really like is when the consistent 15 kilos is on. Once we get to about 20 yards, 15, 20 yards, it looks like shit. It changed the mechanics, and they can't transition into top speed work.
Exactly, and this is why Randy and I requested from 1080 back in 2016 or 17, I think it was. Randy was the first to get his in 215. I think it was 17 that we asked that they give us this, because this is what happens when you accelerate, because you've got to overcome the biggest inertial forces, the first 4 steps virtually. And that's why Randy says that, Olympic lifting will only help us in, well, he says 2 steps. I say 4 steps, but
no.
Yeah.
And that's, and looking back, all you're doing without reducing the resistance of that sprint is practicing the first 10 yards or the first 10 meters for the entire 20 meters. That's all you're doing is you're practicing that, because you're not changing the angles at all with that resistance, right?
No, that at 20 meters, you're still very much in an acceleration position. But the interesting part is there that when you then have, the 8-10 minutes recovery, and then you do an assisted 20 meters plus 20 meters unassisted. In other words, the assistance has stopped, and then you just keep going with that speed that you had coming out of those 20 meters. The interesting thing there is that in this case, my athlete, he feels he can't really get that to fire. And this is interesting, because this is, again, it's like we're doing, let's say what do we call them? They call the Huntington belt, the activator belt. The activator belt for Sue, which is these rubber bands, is the worst thing he likes, and that is when you put hurdles out, mini hurdles out, and he's got to open up his stride, and he's got resistance because he hasn't got a big GT length, so he can't utilize a big range of motion and being able to pick up foot speed because of the fact that he's got these big levers to work with. He's got short levers, so therefore that's playing straight into what he is worst at. And I think what I've been able to find out now is that what my guy has the biggest problem with is differentiating between the transition of acceleration into max velocity. And when I give him these two separated, he has a problem with it. He says he can't feel positions, he feels awkward and so forth. And that would explain why we have races where, he comes out and he does, it looks fantastic in 50 meters. Mm-hmm. And then it just doesn't click. Why? Obviously, because he's not able to feel this transition. And therefore, my belief is that if I give him these tasks, then when I break this up and concentrate on the 2 variables by themselves, that will force an adaptation that he has to sort of, it will be a natural adaptation. There's no other, way for his central nervous system to react. It's going to have to, reprogram itself.
So let me ask this: do you believe that maximal outputs versus operational outputs, that Improving top speed will improve your acceleration.
No.
Yeah. No. And I've kind of thought that for a little bit, and it's just different. It's different systems.
Different systems, yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because Randy called me the other day and he says he wants to buy there's two versions of Muscle Lab. There's one Muscle Lab, and then the Italians did another system which was Bosco's from the beginning, and it's called Smart Coach. I think they've got a better software, to be honest. I'm just used to Muscle Lab, so I probably won't change. But Randy is interested in looking at it because he's realized that the EA index that we got out, which is peak velocity divided by time to peak velocity, that shows you the ability to be able to utilize elasticity. Now, Randy has been saying for 25 or 30 years that maybe the biggest limiting factor to max velocity isn't generally fast twitch fibers, because we've seen that with guys that we've had in Sweden. It's more the fact that if you can or cannot reposition fast enough.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you a case. We pulled Raina and I pulled a triple jumper. Won't name any names. One of the best in the world all time. And we pulled him at 11.6 meters per second, which is 10-15 speed.
Mm-hmm.
We pulled 11.8.
In his approach.
No, we pulled him for a flying,
Okay. I'm gonna say, holy shit.
So we hit 12 meters per second. Now we're using a laser at the same time, and we're going by this measurement that I've shown the guys that this is what you should be looking at, which I've told you, which we'll keep a secret. And he's positive. In other words, he's able to reposition. So we pulled him at 12.2. He's repositioning. 12.3. He's repositioning. We stopped it. So in other words, here's a guy who he's probably run 10:30, but he's repositioning faster than what Bolt has ever run.
I was gonna say he's in the wrong event.
Well, it shows that what the interesting thing here, and this shows that there are people who've got the ability to be able to reposition much faster than they've got an engine that can drive this thing down. So in other words, again, this means that we're looking at the wrong talents, because if we're looking at the right talents, we would know.
You could build the damn engine.
Yeah, we can build the engine. If we know that this guy has got elasticity running out of his ears, then he can reposition. All we need to do is build a bigger engine. But we're so bad at testing that we're picking up the wrong guys. Now, I'll give you an example. Everybody, I'm not going to say that you're one of them, but a lot of your countrymen think that the CMG, the counter movement jump, is the best test there is for sprint speed. It's the worst.
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
It's the worst bloody test there is, because all it tells you is you've got somebody who can push for 500 milliseconds. Well, that's great. Unfortunately, when you're running real fast, you're in the ground about 75 milliseconds. So it's about 6 times too slow.
Yeah.
Or too long. So is that the we want to be able to look at that? That's why, for example, MFX, they came out with their new software where they look at their pop 100. In other words, what's happening in that first 100 milliseconds. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. That's interesting. Because what we saw when we started testing guys is there were guys who were jumping 55 centimeters who were nearly as fast in top velocity as these guys who were jumping 75, 80 centimeters. Now, how the hell were they doing that? It's because their acceleration, the first 100 milliseconds, was virtually vertical.
Mm-hmm.
They're the guys that we needed to put in the sprint program.
Yeah.
Those guys, well, they're thrown out and told to go and play basketball or volleyball.
Or they just suck at accelerating, so they're like, you're not fast enough.
Yeah, because they don't have enough horsepower. But they've got all those other things that are the real skills that are going to be very, very crucial once you learn how to, and you get to the stage where you're running very fast.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we need to be able to identify as quickly as possible, that we don't mess around and sort of, have somebody, yeah, sure, they can run 10:40. That's great. That's very fast. Of course it is. But it's not going to get you in an Olympic final in 100 meters. But it's good for a long jumper. It's good for a triple jumper. It's very good for a decathlete. So maybe you should be doing that, or playing football or something other, where you can utilize that speed to its fullest extent. But if you are running 100 meters, yeah, sure, there are people who are going to say, well, I enjoy running 100 meters at 10:40. But, you know, if you're trying to run as fast as possible, then 10:40, look, it ain't going to buy it.